We are live from the SportsLink studio here in Muncie, Indiana for the third episode of the HB Toss. I'm your host, AJ Swiatek, alongside Charlie Maurer. And Charlie, I'm excited to talk some football.
Yeah, week 6 in the NFL. We got some great matchups. We're going to talk about a lot of them too, talk a little fantasy, but great to be here, AJ.
Certainly looking forward to it, but before we go to week 6, we're going to take a look at our first segment, week 5, the week prior, in 60 seconds. As we get that underway, the week started with more of the same from Thursday Night Football, as after 5 periods of action, the Colts edged out a win over the Broncos 12-9. No touchdown was scored in that one. Then Sunday started off with 2 teams traveling to London. The G-Men went out there and upset the Packers. Aaron Rodgers certainly starting to miss Davante Adams. He fell 27-22. Then the Jets, led by Zach Wilson and Pepsi Zero Sugar Rookie of the Week, Sauce Gardner, picked up a dominating victory 40-17 over a banged-up Dolphins squad. Then the Eagles continue to stay undefeated with a 20-17 win over a struggling Cardinals team. And if you want to talk about a team that's missing a player, they need DeAndre Hopkins back out there on the field. Then the Cowboys, they went into Los Angeles and they beat the defending champions as Cooper Rush stays undefeated as an NFL starter. We'll get to that one in a little bit as he has a primetime matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. And finally, Monday Night Football. Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, they stayed red hot. They took on the Raiders. They walked away with a 30-29 victory, and now they're in for their biggest game of the season against the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, and how about that Chiefs-Raiders game? Going down 17-0 to start the ball game. Patrick Mahomes, this Chiefs offense. Travis Kelce, 4 touchdowns, a huge AFC West win for them, and then you got the Chiefs and the Bills coming up this week too. But I mean, you remember back a couple of years ago, in the playoffs, Chiefs-Texans, down by multiple scores, coming back and winning that playoff game as well. It seems like no lead is big enough for Patrick Mahomes not to come back.
It's never safe when you have a lead in Kansas City. And as you mentioned, that security blanket and Travis Kelce, so many people went into the season wondering, without Tyreek Hill, how will Patrick Mahomes perform? I think that it's been evident. 4 touchdowns, as you mentioned, to Travis Kelce. We'll get to that game here in a second against the Buffalo Bills. But first, Charlie, let's talk about the biggest movers from last week. Week 5 saw a lot of games that were not finishing the way that a lot of people expected. We'll start with the teams on the up and up, and we'll start with my New York Jets. Charlie, as we mentioned, went into their first home game, first home victory, that is, over the Miami Dolphins, 40-17.
And you already talked about Sauce Gardner, right? First-round draft pick, obvious best defensive back in this draft class. Could he live up to the hype? Cincinnati, obviously the best cornerback in the country last year as well. Finally really shows out for his first big game. A huge win against the Miami Dolphins. Yes, Teddy Bridgewater at the helm, but he's been a very, very solid quarterback for his entire career. No Tua Tagovailoa, but Zach Wilson coming back, having injury problems now into his second year as well, but a huge win for the New York Jets at home.
Absolutely. Sauce looks great, as you mentioned. He forced that safety on the first play of the game that actually knocked Teddy Bridgewater out. We got to see a little bit of Kansas State 7th-round rookie Skylar Thompson. He'll start again this week, but the Jets certainly moving up all forms of rankings on every single platform. They looked really good, and believe it or not, this New York team is 3-2, their first winning record since being 1-0 back in 2018. Definitely a good progression here from Robert Saleh and Zach Wilson in year 2. The other team that we see moving up just about every ranking, I mean, how is this Cowboys team doing so well with Cooper Rush, Charlie?
It's Cooper Rush mania. I mean, why would you want Dak Prescott to come back? No, I'm just kidding. Dak Prescott, a very good quarterback. Cooper Rush, though, still undefeated as a Dallas Cowboy. I mean, don't get me wrong, that Dallas defense is a problem. Micah Parsons on the other side of the ball, that secondary with Diggs playing very, very good football, and I'm excited to talk about that matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles here in just a few minutes. But the Cowboys, I mean, they're doing just enough, and Cooper Rush seems like he gets better every week. We always talk about, or at least we started at first, this Cowboys offense, they can't really score the ball, they're relying on their defense, but all of a sudden, shoot, they're moving the ball. Tony Pollard, Ezekiel, Elliott, the 2-headed monster running back room, they're doing great. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb now back at full strength after being injured earlier in the year, but this Cowboys offense looking to have, or showing that they're going to cause some problems to opposing defenses.
Yeah, Charlie, I really like that point you made about doing just enough. It feels like the entire NFC East, this division that in recent memory has gotten a lot of scrutiny, is doing just that. Now the Cowboys sitting at 5-1, the Eagles 5-0. I mean, this team, both of these teams, as well as the Commanders, I mean, the entire division, it feels like these are teams that can make the playoffs, make the postseason. And the Cowboys, if they're performing like this with Cooper Rush, as you mentioned, that defense playing so well, you've got to wonder what's going to happen when Dak comes back next week.
Yeah, and it felt like the conversation just a year ago was, man, the NFC East is the worst division in football. Now all of a sudden, I mean, it's a good time to be a New York fan, whether you're the Jets side or the Giants side. A big win against the Packers.
Even the Bills.
Absolutely. I mean, either way, this NFC East has already become maybe obviously not the worst division in football, but maybe the best division in football all of a sudden. Obviously the Eagles, maybe the favorites in the NFC right now. The Giants, big win last week against Green Bay. You talked about the Commanders, they got a win last night against the Bears. So, I mean, and then obviously the Cowboys. So NFC East looking really strong.
Yeah, that entire NFC East has turned the program around. Every single team with a new head coach in recent memory, and they are all fitting the part. Now we're going to move to two teams on the other side of the spectrum, Charlie. Two teams that are moving down in just about every ranking. Let's start with the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, the Browns are a tricky situation, obviously. I'm a Colts fan. Jacoby Brissett was in Indianapolis for a year, and at the end of the day, he's one of the best backup QBs in football. At the end of the day, he will get you in a position to win. You know, if you give him 10 games, he'll probably win 4 or 5 at most. And Jacoby Brissett has done well up until this point. You got to love the Nick Chubb show right now. He's definitely the best running back in football, especially Jonathan Taylor getting banged up a little bit throughout this year, not necessarily living up to expectations. Nick Chubb is a fantastic running back. Amari Cooper's doing well, but that defensive side of the ball, it's struggling. You got to love Myles Garrett, but the Browns right now, they're waiting for Deshaun Watson to get back, and they're hoping it's going to be pretty soon. At least they're trying to get through week by week until they can get him back at the helm, at least for the first time in a Cleveland Browns uniform. But the Browns, Jacoby Brissett, they got some work to do.
Yeah, they certainly do. And as you mentioned, that Browns team, they fell to the Chargers all of a sudden with a losing record. But Brissett, he's not really been the problem. This Browns offense ranks #1 in DVOA. I think that will shock a lot of people. Also for the Browns, Jacoby Brissett, that offense has yet to put up less than 20 points in an outing. So there's definitely positives. Deshaun Watson coming back. All hope is not lost. I mean, if you told fans they were starting with the backup quarterback, it's not like this season is a lost cause. But with so much talent on the defensive end, as you mentioned, starts the season definitely a little slower than Cleveland fans would have liked.
And it feels like they've been in every game. I know it was a tough battle with the Chargers, and the offense hasn't been the problem. Defense, they've dealt with a lot of injuries. Again, talked about Myles Garrett. He experienced that car crash yet. He was out for a week as well. But, you know, like you said, there is still hope in Cleveland. The Browns, they have a good roster. They have talent. Obviously, they're a little banged up here and there, but the offense has not been the problem. But you think about adding Deshaun Watson at quarterback, who's arguably, you know, top 5 quarterback in the NFL, with the weapons, with Amari Cooper, with Nick Chubb, with Hunt, excuse me. What's his first name?
Kareem.
Thank you, Kareem
Yes.
Hunt. Yes, you add him into the mix as well. I mean, that's a team that can seriously cause some damage.
Yeah, I mean, it's really all going to come down to what Deshaun Watson looks like when he comes back. I mean, this team traded their entire future in terms of draft capital for a guy who's going to miss the first 11 games. Cleveland fans, I mean, they've been very unhappy, to say the least, because you had a guy who took you to the playoffs. Now all of a sudden it feels like you're back at square one. But as you mentioned, if Deshaun comes back looking like that top 5 quarterback that we saw him play as in Houston, this Cleveland team has potential to be on the other side of this biggest movers category. And Charlie, one team left. We talked about the Cowboys and Cooper Rush. They took down the defending Super Bowl champion Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, the Cowboys, they're looking good, but also the Rams, as you mentioned, they maybe not living to expectations right now after winning the Super Bowl last year. That offensive line is a problem. Matthew Stafford does not have time in the pocket to deliver to his targets. Seems like the offense is centered around Cooper Kupp. Too much, almost. I mean, you have 2 guys in Henderson and also Akers who are solid running backs. A little bit of a question, too, coming into the year. Who's going to be the guy? And right now, I don't think we have that answer still to this point, moving on to the week 6. But the defense still looks solid. They put their team in a position to win that game against the Cowboys. But at the end of the day, the offense is the problem. And that wasn't the problem at all last year. I mean, it seemed like they were scoring effortlessly. And how much did losing Odell Beckham Jr. really hurt them? You know, obviously still a free agent. Where is he going to sign? Almost going on like a college recruiting tour right now is Odell Beckham Jr. But Cooper Kupp, definitely a top 5 wide receiver. But who's that second guy? Who's going to step up? So far, it's been Tyler Hegby. He's been very, very solid. I know we'll talk about him here in just a little bit too. But right now, who's going to be that other wideout to step up? And can the offensive line also play well as we get into the second half of the season?
Right, and Charlie, if you told me that this Rams team that added Allen Robinson in the offseason would be starting as poorly as they did, I frankly wouldn't believe you. But as you mentioned, it has been the offense that has been the problem for this team. And I think a lot of that actually comes down to one of the top play callers in the league, Sean McVay. He got that mega contract, but it feels like he has had a really hard time getting all of the pieces of this offense involved. As you mentioned, it's been the Cooper Kupp show, and I love Cooper Kupp as much as the next guy. He's the best wide receiver in the NFL, but you have to start spreading the ball. As you mentioned, they're certainly missing Odell Beckham Jr. In an interview earlier this week, Sean McVay said they still are very open to bringing him back, and I think that could be the spark plug that this offense needs. But in the meantime, this offense has looked stagnant, only putting up 10 points last week. I mean, it's borderline unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. Odell Beckham Jr., have your opinions about him, what he has to say off the field. At the end of the day, on the field, he is a talented wide receiver. I mean, at one point, you could have considered him a top 5 wide receiver, and I still think to this day he's a top 20 wide receiver in the NFL. Very, very talented. Obviously a deep threat, but also very well after the catch. So I wouldn't be surprised if they really take a hard look and be like, yeah, we need OBJ back in the building.
Yeah, that's not a crazy take to make either. I mean, until he went down in the Super Bowl, it looked like he was going to be the Super Bowl MVP. He was showing out for that Rams team that would eventually go on to win the Super Bowl. He was a big part of that, although he was injured. Bringing him back would be big for Los Angeles, as it feels like they need any answer they can find at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see. I'm excited to see what LA is going to do. I like Sean McVay. I mean, obviously you got the Shanahans, and you also have the LaFleurs, but Sean McVay, obviously one of the younger coaches. I think the youngest coach in the NFL, if I'm correct. But I mean, you got to love what he did last year, and I'm excited to see if they can get back to that point, the Rams offense, that is.
Yeah, I liked all those coaches you named, all the bright young minds in the league. It feels like everyone wants one of those coveted offensive guys, Mike and Matt LaFleur, anyone who's been in the Shanahan system, and now Sean McVay. The Rams certainly still with potential. And as we talk about potential, Charlie, I'm going to shift to this next segment. The Cardinals coming off 2 consecutive wins. That is the Ball State Cardinals. We're going to send it to Madison Surface, who is with Ball State QB1 John Paddock, who has definitely been looking the part so far as the QB1. He'll talk about the TB12 mentality.
All right, John Paddock, QB1. Who are the top 5 quarterbacks you want to model your game after?
Ooh, good question. Derek Carr is a guy that I've done a lot of study on. I really like him. Brady, of course. Drew Brees is a guy I watched growing up. Russell Wilson and Stafford.
Now, if you could have lunch with one of those quarterbacks, who would it be?
Brady.
Why is that?
I mean, I think like the TB12 method, I'd kind of like to dive into that more. He's kind of an interesting person, and he's experienced a lot, and he's the best. So.
All right, thank you so much, John. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Madison. Always great to hear from QB1. John Paddock has certainly looked the part this season, Charlie.
Yeah, he's played great. He hasn't played a lot before this year behind Drew, played for 4 years, but now 2-time MAC West Division Offensive Player of the Week in the Mid-American Conference and back-to-back wins in the MAC as well. Most recently up in Mount Pleasant against Central Michigan, he looked good. Offense a little stagnant, but going up against a UConn team that's banged up on the defensive side of the ball, I expect the Cardinals to get a win and John Paddock to have another good game.
Certainly, he's done everything this coaching staff led by Mike New has asked of him. He's come in, he's looked the part. As you mentioned, he spent 4 years on the bench. It's his time to shine as QB1. He has this Cardinals team in serious hopes, not only of a MAC West championship, but a potential bowl game.
And it's weird almost to have a non-conference game this late in the season, coming off 2 big wins in MAC play and now have to come home and play UConn. They have a home and home this year as well, or for next year as well with UConn. But either way, John Paddock playing great football. Now Ball State has to bring it back in, get a win that they are favored to win this week as well at home, and then move on to the rest of MAC play.
Certainly, and for anyone interested in watching that game versus UConn, you can catch it on the Sports Link channel on YouTube, SL Digital Radio. You'll be able to listen to Charlie, you'll be able to listen to myself, a couple other guys on the crew. Definitely will be an interesting one that we expect the Cardinals to win. But we'll go back to the professional turf now, Charlie, the biggest stage that football is played at. Week 6, we've got 4 key game picks. I'm going to start us off with the Bengals traveling down to New Orleans to take on the Saints. Who do you like in this one?
And this is the game that I spent the most time thinking about when you told me we were going to be talking about it, because it's a toss-up, in my opinion. The Bengals haven't been looking like the Bengals at all this year, coming off a tough loss against the Ravens. Joey B hasn't looked like himself, and Zach Taylor, offensive play calls. He's been in a lot of scrutiny calling plays as well over in Cincinnati. But I think I like the Saints at home, the Superdome. The environment there in New Orleans, it's electric. It might be the toughest place to play in the National Football League. Looks like Jameis Winston not going to be playing on Sunday. It's going to be Andy Dalton, who past 2 weeks has played very, very well. Saints, a touchdown win last week against the Seahawks, who Seahawks have been looking very, very good. Offense, very solid, but the way that the Saints were able to outscore Seattle and Geno Smith, who has been one of the most efficient offenses in football to this point in the season, was very impressive. 39 points against the Seahawks, and now Andy Dalton, along with Taysom Hill, who we saw get in the mix a lot more last week, which I love. The Saints are more fun when Taysom Hill has the football, whether that's in the pass catching or on the ground, or even at a wildcat, even though he played quarterback in college. But I think the Saints right now, they have a lot of momentum. They've played well all year long. I like them at home.
Charlie, you mentioned how hard it is to play in the Superdome, but it's got to be the most easy for any team, the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow going back home, back down to Louisiana. I've got to say, I like the Bengals in this one. The Bengals have been in all 5 of their games this season. I mean, they're a couple plays away from being 5-0. You mentioned they haven't looked themselves, and the record certainly shows that, but Burrow has showed flashes. Zach Taylor looks to get back on track. I think this is the perfect place to do it. He'll head down to New Orleans, walk away with the win. And you mentioned Taysom Hill. It feels like this New Orleans coaching staff without Sean Payton just completely forgot about him until this week. There's been a lot of scrutiny down there as well. I feel like almost every NFL coaching staff in the league right now, outside of a few, are getting scrutiny left and right. And I think that might be a little bit warranted because the Saints team has had a hard time getting the ball moving. And if they get it to Taysom Hill, I can definitely see where you're coming from with New Orleans.
Yeah, Taysom Hill, what an odd play. And then obviously, just to switch over to fantasy for a second too, you can play him at tight end. I mean, technically he is listed at a tight end, but look, he's gonna take handoffs. He's gonna be worked in the passing game. He might even throw some passes too. I mean, if anything showed last week, Taysom Hill is a weapon that the Saints need to use. So if you're in your fantasy room right now, you got to buy, right, maybe at the tight end position, Taysom Hill may be available on the waiver wire. Go pick him up. That's not a bad play at all.
Certainly, as long as Andy Dalton's at the helm, you got to imagine they're going to let Taysom Hill air it out at least a couple times. Look to catch this Bengals defense that has not looked themselves this season a little bit off guard. I don't hate the Saints pick, but ultimately I'm going to ride with the #1 overall pick, Joey B. We'll head to another game. Ravens heading into New York. They'll play the G-Men.
Give me the Giants. I know a lot of people are not going to agree with me that the Ravens, they have an electric offense. Lamar Jackson, his statement year after not getting signed to a long-term contract this past offseason. But I like the Giants. A big win in London against Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. No one expected them to win that game, and the defense showed out. Saquon Barkley starting to look like Saquon Barkley for the first time, I think, since his rookie year. At least it feels like. And Daniel Jones, I mean, say what you want. We'll talk about Daniel Jones in a little bit too, but right now he has done a lot. He's done just enough almost even to win ball games, and that's what they need to do. This Giants defense has looked good. They have weapons. Man, I'm riding the New York wave. I love Brian Dable. Give me the Giants.
Charlie, I'm not going to argue that the Giants haven't looked like the better team this season because they certainly have. Maybe this is me buying into pedigrees a little bit, or maybe it's just having faith in the better quarterback, but I think I'm going to ride with the Ravens here. Lamar Jackson, as you mentioned, he's been playing MVP football. He has looked much more improved, not only as a passer, but much more civilized in the run game. He doesn't just force it to run outside every time. Lamar Jackson has looked so good this season. And the Giants, I mean, they've looked great themselves, but I think that just coaching staff led by Brian Dable and Wink Martindale, the defensive coordinator. You think the Ravens are used to him. He coached there for 6 seasons. I think that Lamar will know what to look for on the defensive end. I think he'll hit his tight end, Mark Andrews, who has been having a phenomenal season, and I think the Ravens will walk away with a victory.
And I love the Ravens offense. You got to love Lamar Jackson too. But at the end of the day, that wide receiver room looking pretty thin. Bateman has been hurt for the majority of the year.
He will miss this week as well.
So there you go. I mean, at the end of the day, there are not many targets on the field right now for Lamar Jackson, and not to mention that he missed a lot of throws last week against the Bengals. Very effective on the run, but the question has always been, can Lamar Jackson consistently throw at a good number? And, I mean, so far he's done pretty solid. He did enough to win last week. But Mark Andrews, maybe a top 3 tight end. I mean, you got Travis Kelce, you got Mark Andrews. Both of them are very solid, but at the end of the day, that wide receiver room is small. And I think the Giants, their defense has been playing really well. And they're at home too. I mean, MetLife, it's electric in there.
Charlie, you want to talk about a bad wide receiver core? Who are the Giants throwing the ball to? I mean, if you're going to go into the Ravens wide receiver core, who are they throwing the ball to? Wan'Dale Robinson, who's back this week? I mean, both quarterbacks do not have much help around them, and I've been impressed from what I've seen from both Daniel Jones and Lamar Jackson. But when it comes to two teams with stout defenses with no wide receivers, give me Lamar Jackson all day long.
It's a good pick. I respect it.
Hey, Charlie, we're going to go to the game of the week. It's not called the game of the week. I think we both know where we're going here. The Bills head to Arrowhead. They'll take on the Chiefs. AFC Championship rematch. Who do you like in this one? I'm excited to talk about it.
Hashtag beat the Chiefs. Give me the Bills on the road at Arrowhead. I think Josh Allen, this has been a game that he has had circled, and the entire Buffalo organization, all the way down to the equipment manager, has had this circled on the calendar when they get to go back to Arrowhead and take on Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs after that playoff loss last year. A lot of controversy with we lost on a coin toss. We lost, because of a 50-50 coin toss, right? Whatever you want to say. But the Bills, they are the best team in football right now. At the end of the day, I know they're banged up on the defensive side of the ball. But after watching last week and that Chiefs defense and how that offense was stagnant to start in that first quarter, you can't afford to go down by 17 to Josh Allen in this Buffalo offense. At the end of the day, Josh Allen, I think, best quarterback in football. I think number 2, maybe 1B. Josh Allen 1A, Patrick Mahomes 1B. I think at the end of the day, these are the outright 2 best quarterbacks in pro football. But I think Josh Allen, just because of what he can add with the running game and wearing out that Chiefs defense a little bit more than Patrick Mahomes can, and especially if the Chiefs start the way that they did last week against the Raiders, I don't think they can come back and beat the Bills.
Well, we mentioned earlier, no deficit is safe, especially in Arrowhead. I just don't see Josh Allen being able to outbattle Patrick Mahomes. I think that's maybe where it comes down to, because for me, Mahomes is the clear one. There's no 1A, 1B. Everyone in the media loves Josh Allen. He's the turkey leg on Thanksgiving. He does it all. Josh Allen's a fun guy, but he's not Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes has consistently just been on a different level since entering this league. I expect an offensive shootout. You mentioned that Bills defense beat up. I think Mahomes is going to pick it apart. I think at Arrowhead, at home, the Chiefs are definitely going to be able to walk away with the win. But as you mentioned, I mean, I love that this game, it feels like is a looming rivalry for years to come. These two young quarterbacks, certainly the two best in the league, regardless of the order you want to put them in. I like Mahomes, you like Allen, but these are the two guys. These are the guys the NFL are pushing everywhere because this is who they want you to watch. This is the game. That AFC Championship, you mentioned hashtag beat the Chiefs. The Bills, that's been their slogan all year long. They want to beat the Chiefs. This is their revenge game, if you will. The winner of this, it feels like, will win the AFC, to be honest with you, Charlie. Both teams, not too many tough games left in the schedule. I mean, this is the one they both had penciled in, circled around. I mean, I'm just so excited to watch it.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
I know the Bills' defense is banged up. I understand that. At the end of the day, it feels like this game is going to come down to which defense can get one stop. One stop in the fourth quarter to give their offense a chance to win the ball game. Do you believe in a banged-up Bills defense or the Chiefs defense, who has been bad for, 5 years now? Ever since Patrick Mahomes has been in the building, it seems like that Chiefs defense has not done enough to solidify the Chiefs as the absolute Super Bowl favorites every year. The question is, can the Chiefs defense get a stop? Can they do enough to give Mahomes a chance to win the ball game? Who do you like more?
You know, just about any other week, these are two defenses this year that I really like. The Buffalo Bills defense, I mean, they've looked like a top 10 unit when they're healthy, arguably top 5. And the Chiefs feels like it's all started to click in front there with Chris Jones, all the way down to safety play with Tyrann Mathieu. They have looked really good. I mean, the Bills, you mentioned who is going to have to punt the football. I mean, some crazy stat. I think going into this year, that 5 of their last 7 games, they didn't punt the ball once. I mean, that's just absolutely unbelievable. That's not a stat you hear too often, and I don't think it comes down to a punt. I think both offenses just look that good, as you mentioned. I mean, I can't remember an era in the NFL where it's like, if a team has to punt the ball, they're going to lose. That's how insane this matchup is. But I think I look at both quarterbacks and who plays more mistake-free football, and that comes down to Patrick Mahomes. Josh Allen, he's got the arm talent, he's got the arm strength, but he still made so many of those throws this season where I just can't help but scratch my head. It feels like he just makes one mistake every game. He wants to be the hero in Buffalo, and he certainly is, but sometimes that hero ball, he gets a little bit ahead of him. I look for just some form of interception, maybe a wrongdoing late there from Allen, and that's where I think the Chiefs pull away. But as you mentioned, I think this will be a shootout all the way to the end.
It's going to be the best game of the week for sure. And I can't believe it's not in primetime. I can't believe it's not the Sunday night game. But either way, be sure to know that at 4:25 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday, I will be sitting on my couch watching that game.
I think just about all of America will, as you mentioned, just absolutely unbelievable. But that is not on prime time. But the game that the NFL schedule makers opted to put on prime time is the next one we'll talk about. Sunday Night Football, NFC East matchup, maybe the biggest rivalry in football. The Cowboys head to Philadelphia. They'll take on the undefeated Eagles. Both starting quarterbacks undefeated this season. Who are you taking?
If this game was in Dallas, I'm taking the Cowboys, but it's not. It's in Philly, and I'm taking the Eagles. I think Jalen Hurts and this offense has looked really, really solid. Jalen Hurts, I think, has taken a huge step from last year. He has shown that he can be a consistent quarterback when actually using this Ryan Herbivores, not just using his legs all the time. I like the weapons. Obviously, the A.J. Brown addition has been solid with the Eagles as well, but that defense has seriously taken a step up this year as well. The Cowboys, I know they are the hot team right now. Cooper Rush playing good football. We obviously talked about them earlier. The defense looking stout. I think this is going to be a battle of the trenches. Who can win at the line of scrimmage on both ends of the football? And I think at the end of the day, the Eagles just have a little more there talent-wise. I mean, if it comes down to a last possession drive, whoever has the ball last, I'm trusting Jalen Hurts to get it done.
Which is just an absolutely crazy thing to say because, I mean, you look 3 years ago, I don't think I've ever seen a quarterback progress in his throwing the way we've seen Jalen Hurts. Coming out of that third year at Alabama, it felt like this guy can't throw the football. He just stares down one read, but, I mean, he's got it together. As you mentioned, I mean, he's probably a top 10 quarterback in the NFL in terms of how he's playing right now at the very least. I'm also going to roll with Philly, and here's an interesting stat for you. I think it's going to come down to the Philadelphia offense versus that Dallas defense, and here's why. The Cowboys defense, arguably the best in the league so far. They haven't allowed more than 19 points all season. As for the Eagles, they're averaging 27 points a game. So this is going to be a hard-fought battle when Jalen Hurts and company are out on the field. But as you mentioned, if I have to bet on one of the quarterbacks, and that's what I often do, it's going to be Jalen Hurts over Cooper Rush.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I like the Cowboys. I mean, you talked about that defense. At the end of the day, I really, really think it's going to be a low-scoring game, and a lot of pressure is going to be put on these running backs. I like the running back room more of the Cowboys, but I seriously could see Jalen Hurts being the leading rusher between Pollard, Ezekiel, Elliott, and also Miles Sanders on the Philly side. I think Jalen Hurts might be the leading rusher, and his escapability in the pocket and being able to extend plays might win them the game.
Yeah, and you mentioned a few guys there that we're about to get to in this next segment. We both agree on the Eagles. The other three, we disagree. Let's head to our last segment of the show, a fan favorite, Fantasy Football Starts and Sits. We're going to start with the starts. Who is someone that you are looking to have in all of your lineups this week, Charlie?
It's a controversial pick, I will say that, just because he has struggled with putting the ball on the ground. But it's Melvin Gordon with Denver. He's taken on the Chargers this week, who has been the worst rush defense in the National Football League through the first 5 weeks. Melvin Gordon right now is the clear number one running back in Denver after Javonte Williams went down with that injury a couple of weeks ago. I know he has struggled with the fumbles. I know he has not been a consistent play, but Melvin Gordon is the number one running back going up against the worst rush defense in the National Football League in the Los Angeles Chargers. A lot of injuries on that side of the football for the Chargers as well, including Joey Bosa, who is an All-Pro and Pro Bowl selection for the Chargers as well. So give me Melvin Gordon. He's projected around that 11 mark. I think he will go over that. I think he might even get into the end zone as well. But either way, he's going to get a healthy amount, especially because Russell Wilson apparently has been dealing with some injury the past week or two. So I think the Broncos are going to rely on the running game, and it starts with Melvin Gordon.
Yeah, that's a pick I really liked. I mean, again, if you told me going into the year that the Chargers would have the worst run D, I wouldn't believe you. But, I mean, they just get bit by the injury bug every single season. It feels like so unfortunate for Los Angeles fans. As you mentioned, Joey Bosa going down. I like the pick with Melvin Gordon. I'm going to stick with a running back of my own. I'm going to head down to Arizona. I'm going to go with Eno Benjamin. It was just reported that James Conner's out this week, and when he got hurt at the end of Week 5, it was Eno Benjamin's backfield. He was getting all of the carries. He also gets to work as a pass-catching back. Kyler Murray's been struggling this season, and the Seahawks' run defense, they've been struggling themselves. I like Eno Benjamin to absolutely eat this week. I think he's going to put up quite the stat line.
Yeah, you mentioned no James Conner. Eno Benjamin, very, very solid running back over in Arizona. They've had some ups and downs this season as well. But at the end of the day, James Conner gets in the end zone a lot. He's not in the ball game. Eno Benjamin's going to get in the end zone as well. I expect him to score at least once on Sunday, so good pick there.
Certainly, especially against the Seahawks defense. It feels inevitable. I really like Eno Benjamin, a great spot start off option if you're able to pick him up off of the waivers. That is, he is a guy that I would love to put in that RB2 spot in a year where running backs are so hard to come by. I feel like Eno Benjamin's that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the Cardinals are going to take a step up this week as well as we move through the season. Kyler Murray, ups and downs, but at the end of the day, he is a top 10 quarterback, maybe a top 5 quarterback. I mean, you mix in the fact that he is so elusive in the pocket. I mean, you saw that Panthers game. I mean, the fact that he can extend the play and still deliver great balls to his wide receivers. I love the addition of Hollywood Brown this year as well. The defense needs to step up as well. But I like Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona too. I know he's kind of on the hot seat, whatever you want to call it. He's still a premier play caller in the NFL, and I think the Cardinals will improve as we get closer to that halfway point.
Yeah, it feels like so many of those college coaching experiments who took their step to the NFL have started to struggle. We saw it with Matt Rule over in Carolina. Now you mentioned Cliff Kingsbury. Arizona fans want him out of there, but I think Eno Benjamin, he'll be able to avoid that. He'll get at least 10 carries this week. I really like what he's able to do with his carries. Charlie, we both gave a running back to start. Who's another player that you are looking to start in all of your leagues this week?
I'm moving to the quarterback position. We already talked about the matchup over in New York. The Giants, give me Danny Dimes, Daniel Jones. He has been so effective with his legs, and I know we're getting into the week 6, so we're starting to flirt with some buys too, especially the quarterback position. Anyone who's in a 2-quarterback league as well, Daniel Jones, a very good start this week. At the end of the day, Daniel Jones is a dual-threat quarterback. I know no one really expected it when he was coming into the league, but Daniel Jones can really do it all. He hasn't thrown that many touchdowns this year, but I like his matchup. I think Daniel Jones is a very, very good play just because at the end of the day, it's become part of the Giants' offense, his running ability. They're running design runs for him now, bootleg runs. And yes, he doesn't have very many targets, but the Giants have a lot of momentum, especially if you have a bye at the quarterback position. Daniel Jones, a very, very good start this week.
Danny Dimes, all right, I like it. I think that one will be interesting. As you mentioned, he has definitely taken a jump this season with Brian Daboll at head coach. It feels like that's exactly what the doctor ordered for Daniel Jones. Definitely in super flex, 2 quarterback formats. I mean, he's an option week to week, but even in 1 quarterbacks, as you mentioned, if you've got a guy on bye, I like the Daniel Jones pick too. That's a sneaky good one. I like that one.
Also talk about the Ravens defense, especially in that secondary. 29th in the NFL right now against quarterbacks from fantasy perspective. And Daniel Jones, yes, not the most accurate or the most consistent quarterback when it comes to throwing the football, but a very good matchup at home against the Ravens, who has really struggled on the defensive side of the football. Daniel Jones, good start.
Certainly, and as you mentioned, those points on the ground always so big. I'm going to stick with another running back here who I expect to do really good on the ground this week. That's Kenneth Walker. Unfortunately for the Seahawks, Rashad Penny went down season-ending injury last week. And with that being said, I think Kenneth Walker is my #1 trade target in all of my leagues. I don't only want to start him this week. I want to start him for the rest of the season. I'll tell you what, I think Kenneth Walker is an RB1 in fantasy moving forward. Pete Carroll has continued to rave about the fact that he is a 3-down running back. This guy is a bell cow back who you're able to trust with an entire workload. When you hear a head coach say that, that's just music to a fantasy owner's ears. He showed his explosive playability last week, able to rip off that 69-yard rushing touchdown. He showed it at Michigan State. I expect him to continue to show it now over in Seattle.
And the Seattle offense is looking really good as we're getting closer to that halfway point in the season. And Rashad Penny was looking really good too. And I really don't think they're losing anything putting Kenneth Walker in there at RB1. I agree. I think he's a must start. As long as he's healthy, he's a must start the rest of the year. It's an offense that looks surprisingly good, and Kenneth Walker can do it all. He's mentioned 3-down running back, has already shown really, really good spurts in the National Football League. Michigan State, Spartan, I mean, you got to play him. I love the pick.
And Charlie, we both already said 2 starts. We both got 1 left apiece. I'll go first this time. I'm going to go over to Los Angeles. I'm going to go with Tyler Hegby. Currently the tight end 6 in PPR formats, and I want to say he's still available in like 22% of ESPN leagues. Just doesn't make any sense to me. I expect him to have a huge week against a P.J. Walker-led Panthers team. This Rams team, they're going to be on the field a lot, and I think that leads to Tyler Hegby finding his way into the end zone.
And you mentioned a lot of red zone targets for Tyler Hegby this year. It's been a lot of the Cooper Kupp show over in Los Angeles with Matthew Stafford. Definitely has his favorite target, but Tyler Hegby, after having an inconsistent year last year, fantasy owners, I think, can finally say, yes, I trust in Tyler Hegby. He's going to have a good week. I agree.
Certainly. Big frame down there in the red zone. I definitely think he'll find his way into the end zone. And tight ends, they've been so hard to find points this season outside of Kels, outside of Andrews. I think Hegby really could sneak his way up there, maybe into that tight end 3, tight end 4 spot. Definitely a guy to watch, and it would start this week. Charlie, you've got 1 start left. Where are you going?
Yeah, we'll keep it in Indiana. We'll head it down to Indianapolis. Christian Kirk on the road against the Colts this week, and I know the Colts defense, very solid against quarterbacks and receivers. Actually best in the NFL from a fantasy perspective this year. But Christian Kirk, 2 touchdowns against the Colts down in Jacksonville in week 2. The Jags have had the Colts number now. Obviously, the last game of the year last year in Jacksonville, and then week 2, as I mentioned, in Jacksonville as well. The Colts have played well against the Jaguars historically in Lucas Oil Stadium, but at the end of the day, Christian Kirk, his production has gone down the past 2 weeks, and I expect, well, his production has gone down 2 weeks, and the Jags haven't been playing well the past 2 weeks either. But I think this is the week that Doug Peterson and the Jacksonville offense gets back into rhythm. Travis Etienne's going to have a good week. I think James Robinson gets a healthy amount of carries, and Christian Kirk will see the double-digit targets again. We saw him have 11-plus up until these past 2 weeks, and he had around that mark as well against the Colts in week 2. Christian Kirk, I think, will find the end zone this week against the Colts.
Certainly, and I hate to say this in Muncie, Indiana, but if there's a team to get back on track against right now, it feels like the Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah, sadly, it is the Colts right now. Obviously, a good win on the road against the Denver Broncos on Thursday night last week, but, man, that offense didn't look very good. The defense looks solid, but it looks like Shaq Leonard's not going to play for the Colts this week either against Jacksonville. Divisional matchup. It's going to be a close game. Again, back to Christian Kirk. I think he finds the end zone, and I think he'll get a healthy amount of targets.
For Christian Kirk, if he wants to get back on track, it'll come down to Trevor Lawrence, and he looked so good to start the season. I like that one. I think he's able to get back on track against the Colts, maybe get back on track and start rolling for the rest of the season. This Jacksonville team, I mean, the AFC is wide open. Why not? Why not? Bet on Christian Kirk. Go with Trevor Lawrence. But there's two sides to every story, Charlie. We've both got 3 sits. I'll let you start it off. Who's someone that you're avoiding in your lineup this week?
Yeah, my first sit of the week, and I think you've talked about it with prior co-hosts as well, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I know that he is RB10 right now in most leagues or in fantasy football production right now. Clyde Edwards-Helaire finally showed what he's probably going to put up the rest of the year. That's around that 5 mark. He doesn't get the carries. He doesn't get enough touches out of the backfield in the pass game. He's being bailed out by the fact that he's gotten in the end zone every single game until last week against the Raiders. Jared McKinnon looks like the guy who's going to be the guy in Kansas City when it comes to the running back position. He gets more of the carries. He even gets more touches out of the backfield as well. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire will still get on the field around that 45 to 50% mark from the snap count, but he's just not productive enough, and nor does he get enough time on the field for you to truly feel like he's a good RB2 flex option. If you have 2 flex spots, I don't even think you start Edwards-Helaire there. I think it's time for him to take a seat, and at the end of the day, he's off my list. I don't think anyone should play him this week.
I certainly agree. I mean, it's hard to find any production from a guy who gets 45% of a snap share. It's even harder when you have 3 running backs there in an offense that loves to pass the ball. I just don't see Edwards-Helaire being a factor for much more in this season. If you're able to get rid of him for just about anything, I think we'd both agree it's time to hop off the Clyde Edwards-Helaire train.
And it's kind of weird because we expect a lot of points, right, in this Bills-Chiefs matchup, but I expect if there's going to be points at the running back position, it's going to be Jerick McKinnon. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire could sneak into the end zone against the Bills, but are you confident enough in starting him this week? Yeah, I think the answer is no.
Certainly not, especially when he's not the guy they go to there at the goal line. They like Isaiah Pacheco, that rookie. I mean, he's really started to feed into that goal line work. I just don't see any value for CEH moving forward. And here's another guy I feel the same way about, another guy we've talked about on the show. I don't understand it with J.K. Dobbins. He's only had 1 game this season, over 7 fantasy points. Wink Martindale's run defense has been absolutely amazing this season. He's going to have to travel to MetLife, as you mentioned, to take on the Giants. Although I like the Ravens in that game, I don't like J.K. Dobbins.
Man, I love the Ohio State Buckeyes. I'm a big fan of J.K. Dobbins. I think he still has potential to be good this season. Obviously, throughout his career, he's dealt with some injuries. But I like the call. J.K. Dobbins hasn't been consistent enough. He had that 1 good week a couple of weeks ago where he got above that 20 mark in fantasy production, but still very similar to CEH. He just hasn't done enough. He hasn't gotten the load. He hasn't gotten enough carries so far this year for me to be confident in playing him. He's around that 10-point projection right now, especially if you're in an 8 or 10-man league. I expect to leave J.K. Dobbins off of the lineup.
Right, a guy with so much potential in a run-heavy offense, but hasn't lived up to the task. Charlie, 2 left each, and I think we're going to start to notice a trend here. I'm going to go with James Robinson, another running back, this time on Jacksonville. We mentioned a team that's heading to Indianapolis, but I agree with you. I think they're going to look to pass the ball to beat this team. It's a formula that's worked in the past, albeit not last week. Stephon Gilmore, I mean, he had a career day. But I think James Robinson, with Travis Etienne there, continuing to get more and more involved. He has that connection from Clemson with Trevor Lawrence. It feels like Robinson's time is starting to dwindle. Doug Peterson, he loves Travis Etienne. He's been getting more and more of his snap share as weeks go by, and I just can't depend on James Robinson to put up more than like 10 points this week.
And I think this is actually the first week where James Robinson isn't projected to score double-digit points, which I think people are starting to pick up on the trend that Travis Etienne is the running back for the rest of this year, at least RB1. You talked about the Clemson connection with Trevor Lawrence and Etienne. I personally like James Robinson more as a running back, but just how we've seen the trend going, we even thought that Etienne was going to be the RB1 starting the year, but Robinson had a great first couple of weeks. We're like, oh, okay, James Robinson's going to be the guy again, but it seems like now we're starting to get closer to the halfway point. It's probably going to be the Etienne show. I agree with the passing, obviously with my Christian Kirk pick, so I agree.
Certainly. I mean, if you look at the ADPs to start the year, I mean, Travis Etienne was being drafted like 8 rounds ahead of James Robinson. And in terms of early season production, it's been the JR15 show. I mean, James Robinson has looked really good there over in Jacksonville. But as you mentioned, Etienne has slowly got that role up and up. He's still recovering from that injury. He's finally starting to look like the Travis Etienne that we know and love from Clemson. And I think he starts to get back on track this week. And I think that this is where James Robinson's role really starts to decline. Charlie, I think you've got 2 more running backs to go. Who are you going to go with for this one?
Yeah, we're staying on the running back trend just because they have struggled this year from a fantasy perspective. Running backs, that is. And I'm going over to Philadelphia. Miles Sanders. He had that 30-point week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and everyone started to predict that this is the time that Miles Sanders actually is going to be a consistent running back option, and I'm telling you, he's not. The Dallas Cowboys defense is very solid. They are very good against the run. That front seven might be the best in professional football right now, and I think at the end of the day, it's going to be Jalen Hurts who's going to be the leading rusher. Miles Sanders, I think, is a solid running back, and it's hard to leave an obvious RB1 off of your fantasy lineup, right? I mean, you have Boston Scott there still, but it is Miles Sanders who is the guy in Philadelphia at the RB1 position. At the end of the day, he hasn't been consistent enough. I like his total carries, but he had that 27 mark against Jacksonville, but he's been right around that 10 to 15 mark overall carries-wise, but at the end of the day, he doesn't get in the end zone enough. I don't trust Miles Sanders this week.
I don't trust him either. I mean, he's one of those guys where, what is this, his 5th year now in the NFL, and he just hasn't shown it yet. I'm going to take that past pedigree over the past 5 weeks. I agree with you. I just don't like Miles Sanders going forward, nor in this week. And another guy in that matchup who I'm staying away from, Charlie, Ezekiel Elliott. Tony Pollard has now looked like the better back for the past 2 seasons now. Zeke has provided very little upside. He kind of has a sluggish type run style. Doesn't provide you much upside in terms of fantasy. Tony Pollard now sneaking into that pass-catching role. I think that as time goes by, Zeke, the trend's going this way. For Pollard, he's just going up and up, and I think that that's just going to continue, and I think that I'm just trying to get ahead of the curve here, predicting that it starts this week, because, I mean, it gets to the point where Mike McCarthy and company, you can't keep Tony Pollard on the bench more than Ezekiel Elliott. You just can't.
And most of the time when Ezekiel Elliott is on the field in a third down situation, it's for pass blocking. I mean, he's the better pass blocker compared to Tony Pollard, absolutely. And he has value at that. But overall, I think people are starting to pick up on the fact that Tony Pollard might just be a better running back than Ezekiel Elliott at this point. He's more dynamic in the passing game. We saw him that big run last week as well, getting in the end zone, his first big week of the fantasy season. I like Tony Pollard as a start this week against the Philly defense, surprisingly, just because Cooper Rush, yes, he has been fantastic, but the Cowboys are going to have to try and establish a line of scrimmage, and I think Tony Pollard is going to get the start and is going to get more carries than Zeke, but I agree. Ezekiel Elliott was kind of a question coming into this season. I agree, leave him off the lineup this week as well.
Certainly. It just feels like Pollard does so much more with his carries than Zeke, and as you mentioned, yes, Zeke does more of the behind-the-scenes things, but you don't get fantasy points for that. This is fantasy starts and sits. It's Tony Pollard's season over here in Muncie, Indiana. I'm a huge Tony Pollard believer, and I think that it starts this week. Charlie, one guy left. Who are you staying away from?
And I can't believe I'm saying it. Yes, the person that you drafted in the first round over in Pittsburgh, Naji Harris, you should not start him this week. At the end of the day, he doesn't get enough carries for me to be impressed, and he doesn't get he's just not utilized enough. I mean, at the end of the day, the Steelers' offense, they have to be the worst in football right now. I love Kenny Pickett. I think he's going to be a very good quarterback in the NFL. But for right now, he's still a rookie. He has had 2 tough matchups, and I just don't like Naji Harris anymore. He doesn't get enough carries. It seems like he cannot get into the end zone. That was his problem last year as well. And this year it's more of the same. I just stay away from, honestly, any Steeler offensive player at this point. I love Deontay Johnson, too, even though he drops a lot of balls. Chase Claypool, obviously a dynamic target down the field. But at the end of the day, stay away from Steeler offensive players, and that includes your first-round draft pick, Naji Harris.
I'd have to agree with you. If you could get absolutely anything for Naji Harris, now's the time to do it. Jaylen Warren has started to eat into that role, and Naji Harris was a guy last year. All of his points, they came from volume. He wasn't like ripping off big runs. He was getting 20 carries a game, and he was taking them for 2.7 yards a carry. Now he's down to 12 carries a game, and he's still rushing ineffectively. Naji's a guy, as you mentioned, I just cannot put any faith in him, not only this week, but moving forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I love Naji Harris. I still think he could have a very, very successful season if the Kenny Pickett show starts to pick up a little bit. I know there's, maybe for the first time in his career outside of last year, Mike Tomlin might be on the hot seat after 3 coaches since the Super Bowl era for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But Naji Harris, at the end of the day, that offense just not good enough, and I don't trust it.
And just so silly that a guy who has never had a losing record before consistently feels like he's on the hot seat in Mike Tomlin. We'll probably be talking about that next week because they have a big matchup this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I think that's where we'll leave it off. 3rd episode of the HB Toss. Charlie, I really appreciate you sitting beside me. This was a fun one.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, AJ.
Certainly. HB Toss brought to you by Victory Honda of Muncie, provided by SportsLink. I'm AJ Swiatek. For Charlie Maurer, we're signing off.